Hello and welcome to another episode of The Defenders on Sunset TV. And in this episode, we are going to look at an extremely important issue, the impact of weather and cold climate on battlefields and the fighting of troops. And we will compare that what the Russians are up against in Ukraine as against what the winter and cold climate brings to bear on the Indian front lines with the Chinese. And we have two experts who will help us understand a variety of issues that are linked to this subject. We have Lieutenant General Rameshwar Yadav, who has held many important positions on our front lines with China in the Himalayas. He's been BGS of 14 Corps. He's also served in the General Staff and BGS in the Eastern Sector. He, being an infantryman, has obviously walked on many of these frontline positions and seen the reality on the ground. And we have General Jagatbir Singh, who is a tank man and also a distinguished fellow at the USI, and somebody who has taken to the academic world very, very intensively and very seriously. And I'll start with you, General Yadav, sir. What is it that the Russian troops have been facing in these cold weather climate in Ukraine, particularly that the altitude of Ukraine is not as mountainous as it is on the LAC in the Ladakh side or even on the McMahon line? And what are the challenges that troops face in that weather, particularly the impact of cold weather on the handheld weapons and other systems that our troops use?
Okay, let us look at the operational planning that we do. We carry out appreciation, and in that appreciation, the ground factor is one of the most important factor to plan an operation. When we look at Ukraine and our own high altitude areas closer to LAC, these are two different terrains altogether. In Ukraine, it is plain, approximately 500 to 600 feet above the sea level, wherein our own LAC areas, they are 14,000 and above. So there is a vast difference, but the common point is the winters. Winters in Russia and the Ukraine, that area, as of now the temperatures are -10, -15 degrees Celsius, and so are the temperatures in our own high altitude areas. So there is a comparison between both of them as far as climate is concerned. Let's talk of Russia. Now Russia has been using winters this time as a weapon against their adversaries. 1820 it was Napoleon, and 1941 Operation Barbarossa, which was launched by Hitler on Russia, wherein they intended capturing Moscow, and they had reached Moscow, say about 200 miles short of it by October. And in fact, the Iraqi elements were quite close to Moscow, but they got delayed. They were not prepared for the winter warfare, in that they did not have the warm clothing, they did not cater for the logistics for winters, and that's why they got stuck up. And on the other side, the Russians, they brought in their Siberian divisions, who were very well equipped for winters, and you know the result. And the Germans, they had to retreat, and they suffered very heavy losses in that. Same template, if you apply on our own LAC, you will find that operations during winter period is very difficult. I'll take you back to 1962. In 1962, Chinese came, they started the operation 20th October, and by mid-November they were out. The main reason primarily was that come the winters, all the passes are going to close, and the logistics, sustenance of the troops across the LAC would be very difficult.
Okay, sir. So that's a very important point you have raised about the limitations that winter poses on operations, whether it is the closing down of passes, whether it's the movement of troops, and the sheer painful experience of fighting in the winters. General Jagat, I want you to explain a bit about the impact on winter on armored vehicles and vehicles that are used even for ferrying troops and logistics. Cold weather, clearly has an impact on the fuel supplies, the movement of troops. And Ukraine, I believe, it is very slushy and muddy. The winter only freezes the ground in Jan-Feb, not now. Whereas in our case, the winter has tremendous impact on even the movement of troops because of fog. Your view?
Thank you very much for this question, Maurav. And as General Yadav has very correctly brought out, he's highlighted certain aspects where, the challenges faced by troops operating in the winter. Naturally, in our case, high altitude is totally different from the plains of Ukraine. In Ukraine, as General Yadav brought out, there were issues faced by both Napoleon and by the Germans. And major battles raged around in Ukraine. Kharkiv was a very major battle in World War II. And at that time, the Russians felt, and rightly so, that defense is easier than offense. And there's a very fine book called Stalin's General, which talked of how General Zhukov, marshaled his troops and how he overcame the German offensive over there. But in our case, I'd like to bring out certain specific points. Firstly, as far as high altitude and armor is concerned, we're not new to high altitude in armor. The first time our troops went into high altitude, the armored troops I'm talking about, was in 1948, where the tanks of 7th Cavalry went to Zojila. Of course, at that time, there were Stuarts. The turret had to be dismantled and they had to go up. Thereafter, in 1962, the AMX tanks of 20th Lancers and Major, that time, Dewan, A.K. Dewan, who became a Major General later, were rushed to Chashul and to stop the Chinese offensive. Subsequently, General Yadav has been the BGS 14 Corps. Mechanized forces have been inducted into the valley, into Leh and Ladakh. Now, as far as the major problems for armor operating here, as you brought out, the first is logistic sustenance. The fuel actually freezes. So how do you get that down? How do you, start a tank in the morning? Next, even for people to work on the tank, sub-zero temperatures, metal is so cold, just touching it is a problem. Then there's efficiency as far as the volumetric efficiency of the engine is concerned. It goes down because of rarefied high altitude conditions. The fuel consumption, which is approximately 6 liters per kilometer in the plains and of Rajasthan, increases substantially when you go in high altitude area because of the problem. So you have to have greater amount of stocking carried out for winter stocking for the fuel. Next major problem, which nobody actually talks about to that extent, is clothing. Now, you talk of extreme winter clothing for the normal soldier who operates in the open patrolling. But how can that soldier with that type of clothing enter a tank and operate in the tank? It's physically impossible. So, they wear far less clothing than that, and it's extremely cold for them. So, they have to have, certain amount of thermal clothing which they use. And next problem is very rightly brought about is infrastructure. Now, you have to have certain amount of protection for these vehicles over there, be it some sort of shelter or some canvas to cover the tanks from the snow over there, which is there. And of course, then you have problems operating in the fog and conditions like that.
Yeah, so very tough conditions.
Very difficult conditions. And our soldiers have always risen up to this.
Yeah, something people don't experience in the winters in the rest of India. Even if there is snow in parts of India's towns and cities, it's nothing like getting your military equipment going in a battlefield situation in the harsh winters. General Yadav, sir, there is another aspect about the winters that we can compare with Ukraine, but obviously our challenges are far more. And that is, because of snow, the green cover and the foliage goes down. And because green cover goes down, you are obviously at an advantage and a disadvantage. Advantage in the case of Ukraine battlefield is to be able to use the drones more effectively. Equally, the disadvantage here that harsh wind conditions make the use of drones quite impossible. Your thoughts?
You see, as for drone or any other weapon system, during winters when it is whiteout conditions, the picking of the targets is very difficult. Moreover, in high altitudes, what we have closer to LAC, after 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, you will find the dense fog. So it is very difficult for anything which is flying in the air to locate anything on the ground. So it becomes very difficult for the drones. Yes, drones now, the way they have come up and with the various, the way they have been used in Ukraine, they probably can use it because it is plain sector and the visibility is there. Though the drones are it is a battle winning factor as on date. We would like to utilize it whenever there is a window of clear weather. We must employ it, but it is very difficult. Now coming to other aspects of high altitude, winter warfare or the mountain warfare in high altitude is a very, very difficult operation, and it is all about logistics. And logistics means our infrastructure. Infrastructure in terms of roads, in terms of helipads, instead of airfields, ALG, etc., closer to the ALC, which earlier we did not have it. Now the present government has made a lot of efforts to improve it, but still there a lot of work has to be done. Our decision makers have to give this an utmost priority in case we want the operational efficiency of our troops. Now it has got a number of issues. Now first issue is these roads should be in a manner that they should be able to take on heavy equipment like large guns and the tanks. You have to carry it. So the hairpin bands which are there, they have to be very wide. The angle at which the roads are there, they have got to be little softer so that these tanks and heavy vehicles and heavy guns can move around. Moreover, there is a requirement of laterals to switch from one axis to another axis. So taking roads from connecting two roads, it's a very difficult job. Though our GRAF and the engineers, they are doing a wonderful job. We require more number of roads. Reason being, in mountains, the operation can only be launched astride a road. You cannot launch operation other than the roads, and these roads are very limited. That means your approaches, whether you are going for offensive or defensive logistics layout, are very, very limited. So in order to widen your complete drawing board for planning your operations, having more flexibility, having more options, creating more surprises, you need more number of roads, wider roads and the better roads. Not only that, en route from your plain sector to the LAC, the distances are 300 to 500 kilometers. So there is a requirement of staging areas, and these staging areas must have adequate logistics installations to take care of troops which are going to be housed there, especially the reserves which are going to come up from rear. Not only that, the stocking levels of all the forward troops has got to be 3 to 4 months so that they can sustain themselves as and whatever be the contingency in that area.
Right.
Because it is all about logistics, and decision makers have to ensure that this kind of facilities are given to the troops. And I can assure you, given this kind of infrastructure and troops, our troops, they have already proven their mettle in all the battles that we have fought, and I'm sure they will come up to the mark whenever a situation so arises.
Right. Well put, sir. Well put. Now, General Jagat, tank warfare is often their strongest asset is maneuver warfare. Now, winters further restrict maneuvers. Secondly, as I've read about Ukraine, the troops there are sticking closer to each other for want of not getting isolated or caught up in small pockets of operations. Here, one reason it is difficult to stall tank activity is the space they occupy, and the space allows them to dodge enemy fire and to bring about greater impact on a larger area. And I think that was one of the reasons why from the times of General Sundarji, the decision was taken to put A vehicles out in the Ladakh front. Now, how is it that in winter, the operations go through a dramatic change in standard operating procedure as against in the summers?
It's a very interesting question that you brought out. Firstly, I want to cover the point of maneuver and of the centrality of the tank, which has been questioned by a large number of observers throughout. A lot of it is not based on actual data which is available. So the problem actually in Ukraine was not the space for maneuver, but bulk of the space for maneuver was caused by the large number of built up areas that have emerged and the smaller towns. And this is the problem which we are going to face increasingly as far as our western borders are concerned, particularly in the developed sector. You know, as these villages and towns are increasing, your space for maneuver gets restricted. But as you brought out, you know, the tank basically is fire and maneuver, and it's the only weapon system in the world presently that can, you know, capture, seize and hold the territory. So it's, you know, got a centrality in the place as far as the battlefield is concerned. Now, when you come into the area of the northern frontiers, what we talk about, the LAC, the space for maneuver is also restricted there. It is not available there throughout, because a lot of your space for maneuver is restricted in the terms of the terrain configuration. So you can only move your tanks and maneuver, though places are existing, in the wide open valley areas. You're not going to be maneuvering tanks on the peaks of the, you know, mountain. So that's something you have to understand. And to reach that area, you, as Sir had very rightly brought about, the axes are limited, the passes are limited, the induction routes are limited. There are rivers also over there. So these are things that you have to bear in mind. And as far as the terrain goes, you see, as long as the ground is firm, you can move your tanks. The problem comes when the ground gets slushy and the ground gets boggy. And today we are, you know, on 16th of December, we are celebrating victory in Bangladesh. And you must realize what they did in Bangladesh when they realized that our armor could not move sufficiently in certain places. Very wisely at that time, particularly in 33 Corps, that time they mixed the two components of armor that you had, the PT-76 and the T-55. So you had one element which was providing the firepower and the other element which was being able to maneuver from the side and carry out certain amount of dislocation of the enemy. So I mean, these are tactics which will have to be innovated always, and the mechanized forces have been doing it. Surprisingly, you know, all the theories of mechanized warfare, a lot of them originated from the Russians, the Soviet era, from Tukhachevsky in those days, and which have been written very widely by Richard Simkin in his book Race to the Swift,
Yes.
where he talks of combined arms maneuver and how the Soviets had these operational maneuver groups, how they plan to dislocate. Unfortunately, we haven't seen any of that translating into ground during the present Ukrainian
the
conflict.
irony is, we seem to have been very confident with our tactics because of the equipment that we have, and the same equipment is with the Russians, and they don't seem to have got their tactics right.
The same equipment is with the Russians, and the same equipment is even with the Ukrainians, because they are also operating from Soviet, you know, equipment. But the other point that you brought out, you know, of, you know, spreading out and safe sanctuaries, this is one of the aspects that has been, you know, highlighted in a recent report by RUSI, which is considered the world's oldest think tank, which job is to inform and, you know, on public debate on the issues of security. And one of the issues they brought out is there is no longer any safe sanctuaries available, because you can be pulled out and spotted anywhere you are and engaged at tactical, operational and strategic depth. So the reason for dispersal becomes all the more paramount today.
Okay, very well brought out, very well brought out. General Sir, I want you to explain a bit, in the light of recent Chinese intrusions along the McMahon line at Yangtze, trying to target Tawang, two questions come to my mind. One is, if you look at 62, which you referred to, in that conflict, the Chinese pulled out after November 20th by unilaterally declaring a ceasefire, giving us a blow and get their troops to pull out, apparently because the passes were going to close. And therefore, they didn't want their troops caught in isolation in Indian side across the Himalayas and then be killed or butchered. This time, it is beyond the time of the passes closing, but they have still made this aggressive move towards Yangtze and Tawang. Why? Secondly, what is it that is so different about the mountainous terrain in along the McMahon line in Arunachal as against Ladakh?
Okay. Firstly, I'll deal with the second aspect first. In Ladakh, if you look at the terrain, moment you get into Tibet, moment we cross our own LAC, that area is quite flat. It is a plateau, and a lot of space. Initially, of course, there are defiles along the Indus Valley, along river Indus, and once you cross that Kunlun ranges, thereafter it is generally plains sector. Even in fact, even Dapsang also it is reasonably leveled area. That's why the maneuver by tanks is in a very restricted manner possible. Wherein if you come to Tawang sector and Arunachal Pradesh, these are high altitude areas, and the height of peaks is 16,000, 17,000. And in talking in particular the Yangtze. Now Yangtze is around 17,000 feet height, and if you capture Yangtze, if China captures Yangtze, then they will have look into our defenses of Tawang, Namkachu is on one side, and entire area will be under the observation. We have our presence there in that area, and we have the complete look across the LAC. So it is one of the most dominating feature in that area. Therefore, tactically it is very important. And Chinese pattern is whichever area is tactically important, they somehow manage to start declaring it as a disputed area on some excuse or other. And they have been trying to come to Yangtze number of times. They came in 2019, they came in 2021, now they have come. Now the main question and most interesting question is the timing of this action, what they were trying to do. It was second week of December, and now is the time when the passes start getting closed. In case they were successful in coming and sitting on the heights of Yangtze, they would have stayed there for the entire winter, and once they are there for under 3 to 4 months, they would have dug in, they would consolidate a position, then it would have been very difficult for us to evict it. As you know, in these areas, in case you have to evict enemy from defense in a high altitude, the troop ratio required is 9:1. Take your mind back to Kargil. What happened there? The number of troops that we have to employ was very large. And here in the high altitude areas, snowbound areas, that too in winter is very difficult. So that was probably in my assessment the game plan. Time it in a manner to go in the winters and occupy it. And why go for even in Kargil? What Pakistan did? Normal the winter during winters, both sides they used to de-escalate, they used to vacate certain posts, and in 1998 they did not vacate it, NLI did not vacate those areas, and moment we came down, they crept forward and occupied areas which are dominating our line of communication.
Okay.
So winters being used as a weapon by everybody, and so have we. Just one more minute.
So I'm short of time.
We had used in 1971. The timing of our 1971 war was so that the China could not interfere because of winters.
That's a good point, but I believe historical records show that Sam Manekshaw till the very end was obsessed by a possible Chinese intervention in 71, though that's a different story. Jagat, what is it that Russia needs to refurbish its forces with to fight the winter war, because they're running short of missile systems, they're running short, I'm told, of certain ammunition, and they are running short of items that could change the course of battle, such as even drones. What is it that Russia, briefly?
Okay, very briefly, you know, this point of running short of ammunition, running short of equipment is universal not only for Russia but also for Ukraine. Now it's going to be seen as to which of the two adversaries utilize the winter month to build up their reserves. What has clearly emerged from this conflict, and which has been, you know, highlighted in the Western think tanks, is that the rates with which you're talking about, the expenditure far outstrips the production of that equipment. For example, they said if this same conflict was there in where the United Kingdom's army was would have been involved, they never had ammunition to last beyond 10 days. So you have to have a large number of reserves. You have to have the capacity to produce a large number of ammunition and arms, and you have to build that up. Now, Ukraine has the benefit of being supplied with arms from the West, which is not there from Russia. But the converse is that bulk of the equipment Ukraine uses is Soviet origin equipment. Now, who is manufacturing those types of ammunition? Who is manufacturing the spares for them? Where is that coming from? As far as Russia is concerned, yes, they have their factories in place and they are able to manufacture that. As far as we are concerned, the problem is we get a lot of our spares and supplies from Russia. Now, are they going to send it to us or are they going to use it to build up their own stock?
On that important question, I will have to end the show. And I think we leave it to our intelligent audience to debate amongst themselves that who will get the next lot of Russian ammunition. But thank you very much for your wisdom and thanks very much for your answers. And thanks for watching. Until our next episode, goodbye.